Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Saturday, February 13th, 2021. You are listening and or watching to another edition of Forward Maryland. My name is Bill Woodcock.
And I'm Jason Booms.
And Jason, as we are currently recording this on a Saturday afternoon, a wintry mix is covering the Baltimore-Washington metropolitan area. Being as you're from the North Country and have experienced many a wintry mix in your time, perhaps you could tell me, what is your favorite aspect of a wintry mix event?
Well, it was really very much a Garrison Keillor type of childhood growing up in the great woods of Michigan. Yeah, I know he's further west, but we'll deal with that later. One of the things that we're really big on, is just sliding down this hill that was next to my junior high school, big hill. Of course, they had all that playground equipment, all those big metallic sort of structures. And, when the hill was particularly icy, you'd pick up some really great speed. And with always the question of, would you run into the playground stuff or would you not? Would you spill your drink? A lot of different things could have gone on in those hills in those days, but it was a wonderful time growing up.
So I have follow-up questions to this very quickly. What were you, you were a young pollster at that time. Were you sliding down the hill on your, on your binder?
Well, I thought I made a rather bold choice by going up and down on the Weeble Wobble. Or what was that thing? What was that ball called that everyone bounced on?
I think it may have been the Weeble Wobble.
Might have been. And any damn sleds, tops of garbage cans. That's good enough for anyone from the Midwest, I tell you.
And maybe the better question is, what exactly were you drinking at that point in your life?
Let's see, that would have been what, 82, 83. I was 10, 11, Balvenie, I think.
Most excellent. Whiskey older than you. So for what it's worth, my favorite part of a wintry mix is Snain. And see this? Broken Nose number 2. Face first onto a ice-covered blacktop.
Ah, Jesus.
That's a winner. That was when I was in second grade. But we are not here to spin tales of yore, ladies and gentlemen. We are proud to kick off our conversations with a series of candidates who are seeking the Democratic nomination in the 1st Congressional District. And we are pleased today to bring you Matt Talley. Matt, who's joining us from what it looks like his home studio. It's an incredible setup. Matt, welcome to Forward Maryland.
Well, thank you for having me. You may notice my cat just completely roaming around behind me, so I'm sorry if she's distracting. But just my living room. It got nice enough to have these pretty little LED lights that I try to, keep the vibe going when it comes to the campaigning stuff. Our colors are kind of, purple, pinkish, and I figure, why not?
I love it. So, and we're both cat people, so we're good. Okay. But so tell us about yourself. You're a first-time candidate for this office, and tell us who you are.
Yeah, so I am 30 years old. I am from Cecil, Harford, and Baltimore County, respectively, and I've lived in those 3 counties pretty much 90% of my life. I did move out and head up to New York for college, but beyond that, I've been there my entire life, born and raised in the district. And I am an artist. I've played music my entire life. I've been fortunate enough to do some really cool things when it comes to my music career. I've done some session work. I've done some touring. I've worked with really large bands and producers who have been, nominated for Grammys. I haven't, but they have, and that's what matters. And yeah, that was a large majority of my life up until kind of my mid to late 20s. Beyond that, I think I kind of moved on to a lot of activism work around the time that kind of started fading out. And I think I did that because of a few reasons. And I think a lot of people want to be something when they grow up, right? They have this idea of, I'm just getting out of college and I want to be this or I want to do that. And for me, I never really had this idea of what I wanted to be as much as what I wanted to do. And that was make people's lives better, whether that was through art or whether that was through, kind of championing causes that were important to, different aspects of society. And that's kind of what I moved into. And I started working hand in hand with a lot of groups around the state when it came to organizing protests and petitioning different political organizations as well as politicians in the state. And at one point, I even started a group called the Maryland Protest Network, and we can probably get into that a little bit more moving on. But when we started the Maryland Protest Network, we were fortunate enough to work with a lot of different causes and, really put some pressure on particular situations and issues facing our community. And that's something that I was really proud of. And beyond all that, I am a small business owner. I have been in digital marketing now for approximately 8 years, I guess. And it really just started out as a job right out of college and kind of evolved into something where I was like, man, I'm pretty good at this. I didn't think I was going to be this good at it. I thought it was just a job. Again, my whole thought process with what I wanted to do with my life was just make people's lives better, right? That was like, right. If I'm remembered for anything, that's what I wanted to be remembered for. So for me, that was just a job. And upon realizing that, like, hey, I think I'm pretty good at this, that kind of became an aspect of it as well, where it was like, you know what, there are lots of small businesses out there that are getting trampled by, bigger, larger businesses. They're being ignored by large marketing companies, so they can't get their name out there. They can't get their foot in the door of the community. And maybe that's something I could help them with. And that was kind of what started up my small business, which is called Gray Cat Digital Consulting, because of the little gray cat over there on the counter. So those are some of the things that I've done, and a little quick bio about myself. And yeah, again, I'm just grateful to be here with you guys and talk all things MD1.
Well, we're happy to have you. So you have a very fulfilling, a great life. You're doing awesome things to help your community. What's motivated you to run for first district congressman against the gun-toting Republican incumbent who we know as Andy Harris?
No. So truthfully, it really boiled down to the realization that because I'm from MD1, I've watched countless Democrats for the last decade go up against Andy Harris and lose time and time again. And every single candidate that ran, God bless them, like they're great people, right? You look at their resumes and they have distinguished military careers. They have served in the General Assembly. They've done these great things, and those things aren't to be diminished. But I think when it comes to the people of MD1, they're looking for something different. They don't want a politician. They don't want the cookie cutter resume. And where those things might work literally anywhere else in the state and in a lot of places across the country, it just doesn't work there. And I think it just doesn't work because one of two reasons: either the candidate themselves, the people can read it all across their face that they're full of it, right? They're not buying it, or they are genuinely good people, but because there is a distrust of politicians, there is a distrust of these, we'll call them establishment. We'll maybe delve a little bit into what I mean when I say establishment a little bit later. But when I say that, I'm referring to anybody that's had a part in the system, right? Anybody that has played a role. If you've played a role, it's an immediate distrust factor for a lot of people in the first district because they don't want that. And I think the reason that they voted for Andy Harris is because he wasn't a politician, right? I mean, for the most part, they viewed him as just a doctor. So they were like, hey, he's a medical professional, and he will says it like it is. Well, I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case, but those are the things that they thought of when they think of Andy Harris. And I think if you're going to take him on, they need to think of you the same way. They don't want to think of you as a politician. They want to think of you as somebody that's one of them, that has, like in my case, a small business, something that isn't revolving around the political spectrum. And that's where they're going to place their trust.
Mm-hmm. So how would you describe your political philosophy? You've talked a lot about being in sync with the people of the first district. How do you feel, how you, your approach to politics, policy, how do you think that's compatible with the mindset of the first?
Yeah, so I think that the House of Representatives is the highest office in the land that should be filled by normal people, right? It can be, but it shouldn't necessarily be filled with people who have a ton of political experience. The people that are in the House of Representatives should be representatives. They should be representing the community in which they're from. And I think that because I am from the community, because I've spent my entire life in it, I can kind of attest to not just the needs of it, but the attitudes of the community as well. And understanding that there are a lot of issues on the spectrum of modern politics right now that are not necessarily divisive, but just contested a lot within different communities. We talk about things like Medicare for all, we talk about the Green New Deal, and typically conservative districts or places, they don't want to hear about that stuff. And they don't want to hear about it mainly for the reason that I don't want to hear what you're going to do with my money for somebody else. And that's kind of the mindset behind it. And I think a large failing of not just the Democrats in our state, but across the country is really driving home to those communities. Hey, here are the things that are going on in your neighborhood. Here are the things that are going on in the shore. Here are the things that are going on across the county. And here's how Medicare for All could help those things. Here's how Medicare for All could change those things. Here's how the Green New Deal could impact the eroding shoreline. Here's how these things can help. But when we talk about them, we talk about how they're going to help somewhere else, how they're going to help the whole country. And we put that emphasis on it so much that the people of the district kind of feel like they're forgotten about. Like, well, what about me? These are my taxes that are paying for these things. How's it going to help me? And we can view that in a different light. Some people may say, well, that's selfish, or some people may say, well, we want to talk about everybody. But at the end of the day, when you're winning votes, when you're trying to go out there and convince people of something, you need to speak to their particular situations. And I think I'm fortunate that I have the ability to do that.
Well, people speak to their pocketbooks and their own self-interest. So yeah. I think you're onto something there. So one last question before I kick it over to Jason. And I'm sorry, I hope this is not an uncomfortable question, but it is a question that was a little weird in the forming, and I think maybe we all three agree it was a little weird in the forming. But we're all members of the venerable Maryland politics group on Facebook, and you got into a wee dust-up with a former candidate in the first district about the term "flip the first." What was going on with that? That was a little bit of oddness.
So I think as time goes on, a lot of people within the district, a lot of people that are engaging with the community, especially like you guys and people on different forums, I think they'll begin to understand that I'm kind of a smartass. It's just kind of always been who I am. And those that know me well know that there's no harm to it whatsoever. But I also think that if it's coming right out of the gate, a lot of people who don't know me might go, who the hell does this guy think he is? And admittedly, I think I kind of viewed my footprint to be much smaller than it actually is. So in making, sarcastic comments here and there, being snarky, I thought that I was just kind of being myself in front of my group of people, right? And it turns out that wasn't the case at all, and that plenty of people took notice. And I think there are some slight serious aspects to the conversation that was had, but for the most part, it was just me kind of speaking out of the side of my mouth and catching the attention of the wrong people, right? And I don't know that we should necessarily get into the logistics of it, because I don't believe that they've been settled on all parts, on all parties involved. I think that I've kind of made my peace with what happened and what went on. I think others have not, and that's okay. It's not, that's not my responsibility to handle how they perceive and accept things, and that's cool. I'm totally okay with it. I think what is important is that we note that Flip the First is going to be at the heart of all of our campaigns, right? That's whoever's running for the Democratic nomination is going to, whether intentionally or otherwise, that's going to be what their goal is to flip the first. And After thinking about it for a while, I'm not sure that the first needs to be flipped, right? Obviously, we talk about it politically, flipping it, but I think there are a lot of people in the first that we can speak to about issues that resonate with them, and they've either never voted before, they voted a couple times, they just haven't felt confident in voting for Andy Harris or any Democratic candidate that's come across the table, but they know they don't like Andy. Um, and I think in really realizing that the first necessarily doesn't need to be flipped, it just needs to be won, right? Because I think there are tons of people, both Democratic, Republican, people in the center that are ready for change in the first district. They're ready for it. They just want someone to come along and prove that they are capable of making that change. And again, with respect to everybody that has done the work and has, been there on the ground doing, the hard thing, I think that this campaign is that thing. I think that if nobody else is going to do it, I am. I'm going to. And this campaign is capable of winning those voters who have been waiting for someone to represent them.
That's a great way to wind up. And if I owe anybody 50 cents for saying that term twice, that's fine. But I mean, you will. If you haven't learned already, I could remember Congressman Cradaville, Congressman Bauman, Congressman Gilchrist, Congressman Dyson. It's been flipped many times, you know. So thank you for that distinction, Jason. Over to you.
Thanks, Bill. I want to stick with this theme for a second. I don't want to spend too much time on social media because Lord knows we hear enough of that. But simultaneously, again, and this goes to the theme of some credit taking, I guess, concerns. Can you describe in a little bit more detail your precise role with the Atlas restaurant protests?
Yeah. So when it came to Atlas Restaurant Group, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the story. But historically, Atlas has had a lot of difficulty keeping themselves out of trouble when it comes to their behaviors with the community around them. They are known for poor workplace policies, treating their employees completely just disrespectfully. And beyond all that, they're pretty reputable and known for engaging in discriminatory practices when it comes to those that they serve, those that they are in the business of, essentially providing services to. And I think there are a lot of people that can speak to, and a lot of people that I've spoken with, whether they're employees or entertainers at the Atlas venues and restaurants, or they're just people that have had bad experiences. They can speak to the fact that on multiple situations, on multiple occasions, Atlas has openly said, no, they're not coming in. Well, why aren't they coming in? And well, but just tell them that it's because of their dress code. Or if a certain demographic, will just be blunt with it, people of BIPOC communities come in, why don't you go ahead and sit them at the back? Why don't you just take your time serving them, make sure that, they don't cause a scene? And these are things that have been said to employees, to hosts and servers at Atlas. And I specifically got involved when it came to the discrimination against a lady named Marcia Grant and her son, Dallas Green. It was all over the news this past summer. Dallas and Marcia went to one of the Atlas properties known as Uzo Bay. And they went in, they wanted to get some lunch, and they told them that they couldn't serve them. And they couldn't serve them based on what they were saying was a dress code policy, because Dallas was wearing shorts and he was wearing tennis shoes. And what really prompted the outrage behind this is because Miss Grant decided she was going to take out her cell phone and she was going to record this interaction. And in doing that, she pointed out a white kid who was right around Dallas's age wearing basically the same exact outfit. And her question was, well, why can that family eat here with him, but I can't eat here with my son? And they gave them no real reason other than, oh, I'm sorry, it's the dress code. So as time went on, Ms. Grant kept pushing the issue, and rightfully so. And as she did, that's when a lot of these employees started coming out of the woodwork. All of these former entertainers of Atlas started coming out of the woodwork and saying, no, this is a thing that they do. They do it all the time. They've had multiple instances where this has occurred that the media hasn't caught wind of it, and a few that have. This isn't the first time that the media has caught wind of the fact that Atlas was outright engaging in discriminatory practices. And right around that time, the group that I was involved in, the Maryland Protest Network, we were actively involved in a lot of Black Lives Matter protests, a lot of equal rights protests around the state. And we reached out to Ms. Grant and said, hey, if there's anything that we can do to help, please just let us know. And in doing that, we started doing a series of pretty much weekly protests, sometimes twice in a week, where we would go down into, the Fells Point, Harbor East area and engage at all of the Atlas properties around that area. We would go and we would, kind of demand some kind of response, some kind of action. And on multiple occasions, our group actually got in contact with Alex Smith and said, hey, let us come to the table. Let our groups come to the table and let the community talk. Let them voice their issues. Let's do this. And it was initially received with a lot of, graciousness on the part of Alex. But the moment that Ms. Grant decided that she was going to file a lawsuit for discriminatory practices, they totally flipped on everything. They began to terminate employees who were actively speaking out against Atlas. They began to issue press releases where they believed that the community should be apologizing to them for taking away from their business. And it really was just a very obvious double down on their terrible behavior. And they actually walked back all apologies that they gave to Ms. Grant and her son, because in apologizing, you're essentially admitting culpability, right? You're saying, oh, we did something wrong. And so they had to walk back their apologies because they didn't want to get sued. And these protests that we took part in were just a fraction of the protests that occurred almost every single day in Baltimore when it came to Atlas. And I think there was some kind of misconception that I said that I was responsible for all. No, we were only responsible for the protests that we were involved in, which again were weekly. And despite the fact that maybe our protests were only weekly, we still did have contacts with the employees who were having protests, with the entertainment that were having protests that decided they weren't going to play at Atlas anymore because they didn't want to make money off of that kind of attitude. And we had connections with Zeke Cohen was at one of our protests. He's a city council member. Jill Carter was at one of our protests. She obviously is a state senator. So
we're sort of veering in that, I think, back to that direction. If you had to identify other, community figures or organizations or leaders in those protests, who would you name?
Yeah, I would name them essentially. I think Zeke, being that he was one of the, he is the councilman for that district. He was actively involved in, communicating and facilitating and supporting a lot of the initiatives around those issues. And again, they weren't just all us. I don't know where the misconception came from that we were championing this whole thing. We were just a fraction of, people who were upset about this and trying to do something about it. And specifically, we decided to work pretty much in tandem with Ms. Grant and her son to support them in any activities and any initiatives that they wanted to engage in. One being Dallas's own protest. He wanted to have his own march, and we helped him facilitate that. It was called the Children's March for Equality. And again, I'm not sure why there was any kind of conversation centered around the notion that I didn't take part in that, but there are lots of voices that can attest that I have, and they have since people have kind of come out of the woodwork making those accusations. I think truthfully, when it comes to statements like that, people were looking for something to pick at. Back to, the question that Bill asked about, the flip the first thing, I think that I stepped on some toes. And in doing that, they started to kind of try and dig for anything that Matt hasn't talked about publicly yet. So what ended up happening was I just said, all right, here's my closet. Take a look at it. Here are my skeletons. Here's anything that you could pick at. Here it all is. And from that moment on, there's been absolute silence. So to me, that says that they didn't care about the issues to begin with. They were looking for something to pick at for this guy who offended one of their, favorite politicians in the last few elections. And that's disappointing, but that's also politics, right?
Well, actually, that leads nicely to my next question, which I mean does go to the fact that here you are running for Congress. There will be some elbows thrown.
Of course.
You've got some folks who are running against who are they've either been the previous congressional nominee in that district, B, someone who's known statewide and has a active progressive network of volunteers and fundraisers. And you've got a nurse who, again, someone who has a public service background. At least those are the three other candidates that come to mind. Bearing in mind the current field, as well as the fact that it does appear as though the congressional lines may not be known until later on in the process, that does seem to be tipping itself towards someone who has relatively deep pockets, someone who can wait a while, but who doesn't have to necessarily know what the precise district is now, as opposed to a few months from now. How can you emerge out of this crowded field of people that, number one, have the capability of being well financed, or they're already well known in the district?
Yeah, so to speak to the well financed aspect of it, I think that simply put, that shouldn't be a factor, right? It is unfortunately right now due to campaign finance laws and things surrounding the ability to line the pockets of larger, more well-known politicians. And I think we all know who I'm talking about when I say this. So it's no mistake that, Heather Mazur, she is well known in the community, right? And I don't necessarily have any reason to disparage the work that she's done. I think she's done great work. What I am disappointed in is that she would come out of the gate and kind of make these claims and these, we'll call them resume builders, of the fact that she has a lot of money and that she has a lot of celebrity friends who are going to support her. And to me, that's honestly, it's kind of gross, right? I don't understand why that should in any way be a part of this process. Well, I have, lots of people that like me. Well, yeah, that's great. And they should. You're a great person. But I don't know that that necessarily attests to your ability to lead this district. I just think that it means that you're popular. And that's cool. But being popular doesn't get the job done.
And how are you going to get your message out?
I'm fortunate enough that I've, owned a marketing agency for a while, right? And I've done work with political campaigns in the past, not through my agency specifically, but through other agencies that I've worked for. And I've taken a lot of notes, to be completely honest with you, about the ways that are intentional about engaging. We have a lot of things up our sleeve, I think, when it comes to engaging the community, specifically engaging undecided voters or maybe some disenfranchised Democrats. And of course, you have to reach Republicans in the first district. It's not a matter of just winning your party. The first district is, I think it's like approximately 80% conservative that it votes most of the time. So you have to win those people. You have to. And I'm not certain that money and famous friends is going to do that. I think genuine on the ground work in the community, as well as being just a regular person, is going to resonate more than any dollar sign ever could.
Well, I do want to, I know time is becoming a thing. Let's talk about policy for a second. So if you're talking about winning over, disaffected, moderates or independents or even some, perhaps some soft conservatives, running on a platform of Medicare for all, Green New Deal, how are you going to make the case to them that's a winning platform for the first congressional district?
Yeah, so I have a saying that I say a lot of times, and people, when I say it, they look at me like I have three heads, right? I say that everybody is progressive, they just don't know it yet. And that's because when I sit down and I have one-on-one conversations with my friends who are conservative, and again, I grew up in the first district, I grew up in an evangelical community. A lot of the people that I grew up with and people that I still associate with, they are very conservative people. But when you sit down on a one-on-one basis with them, or you present these things, again, as we talked earlier, in ways that it will benefit them, or at the very least pointing out the hypocrisy and the brokenness in the system, and you say, why is it that Andy Harris is against Medicare for all when he complained and moaned for his first, few months in Congress about the fact that he wasn't getting his his universal health care. That's something that should be noted. Why is it that he can say no to you, but he when he got the job was demanding it immediately? It's because he understands that it's a good system for him. It's just that he doesn't want that system for everybody else. And when you start pointing these things out to just anybody, they go, you know what, that does make sense. And when you begin to say, hey, I understand that, the notion of you paying out of, your taxes scares you, but how much do you pay a month into your insurance already? How much does your employer pay into it? Well, how much more money would your employer be able to give you if they weren't paying into your insurance, and instead it was coming out of your taxes? And the money that's coming out of your taxes will be most likely less than what you're already paying for it. And there is no deductibles. You're getting free prescriptions. You're getting no copays. You're not getting turned down because you have a pre-existing condition. When you start pointing these things out, they go, okay, that makes sense. But I think there is so much hype and so much propaganda and so much conjecture around these things that, like anything else, when you get involved in an echo chamber, you just start hearing the same things over and over again and you start believing them. But when someone comes along and says, all right, I'll take all of your arguments, but can you take mine for a second? And when you have those real conversations with people, they are open to hearing those things. So specifically Medicare for all, I think that's a big thing. I think it also should be noted that I'm probably one of the only Democrats that considers themselves a progressive, right? Who is fully in support of the Second Amendment. And I think that you can be fully in support of the Second Amendment while still wanting to champion things like universal background checks, because 80% of the country agrees with it. It's not a divisive issue when you start saying, yeah, you should have your guns, but you think that people who are a little off their rocker shouldn't have guns, right? And every single time people go, yeah, of course. Okay, well, that's all we're saying. It's been, 20 years that these Republicans have been telling you that Democrats are coming for your guns. How many of your guns have they taken so far? Well, none. Exactly. And they don't want your guns. They want these people who are out seeking to do damage. They want their guns. They want to take them away from those people because they're bad people. And I think we can all agree that they're bad people, right? And when you have these realistic conversations, when you cut out the conjecture, you cut out the BS, essentially, I think most people are on board with a lot of things that they wouldn't normally think that they're on board just because Fox News told them this is bad.
Do you own a gun?
Not currently, no.
Okay, I was curious.
I have my HQL. In the process of purchasing a firearm, actually.
Right. Well, back to you, Bill.
I'm loving a lot of what I'm hearing you say, Matt, because what I'm hearing you say are the appliance of progressive policies in areas around the country, and specifically how it relates to making people's lives better in the first congressional district. And if you heard our last podcast with Delegate Stewart from Montgomery County, that was a big topic of our conversation, was how to apply progressive principles to everywhere in the country.
Sure.
I guess the part that we didn't get to with Delegate Stewart that I'd love to with him at a future time, I'm going to get with to you now, which is that, you mentioned before about needing some Republican support. I'm sure you saw it last year. I'm sure you were on the shore. I know I went to the shore many times last year, and you could not, throw a ball without hitting a Trump-Harris sign. So you don't just have Republicans, you have that brand of Republican.
Sure.
And you know what that brings. So I'm not going to conjecture that you're in any way interested in those people's support, because I would imagine it would be a waste of my question, because I'm assuming that you're not. But how do you face that sort of bile that sort of mindset that will just completely disqualify you for no other reason than you have D after your name.
Sure. That is difficult, right? It's hard to really overcome something like that. And I would have said in 2016, and I did say in 2016, if you voted for Trump, I disagree with you. I absolutely think that you shouldn't be voting for Trump. And here's all the reasons why. And it turns out all of those reasons were 1,000% correct. But if you were disenfranchised with the system and you were looking for an outside candidate, I get the notion of voting for Donald Trump at that point. And at that point, there were a lot of people who switched from voting for Bernie Sanders to voting for Donald Trump. And specifically, the reason that they made that switch was because they kind of viewed them in the same light. Now, a lot of people will, kind of make connections that I don't necessarily think are there between Bernie and Trump. But I think the common denominator that a lot of those voters saw was in their eyes, again, I don't necessarily agree with this notion, but in their eyes, both of these guys tell it like it is. They're not afraid to take on the entire system. They're not afraid to take on their own party. They're not afraid of anyone. And again, I will disagree that Trump is not afraid of anyone. I think he's afraid of a lot of people, and that's why he acts the way he acts. I will agree that Bernie is not afraid of anyone. Bernie will take on his entire party, and he has on multiple occasions, to the dismay of the party, and has, at least in the eyes of the people, come out on top. And fast forward to 2020, I don't know that I can make that same argument when it comes to anybody that voted for Trump. You had 4 years of this. You understood, you watched it, you saw it all happen. We all saw it happen. So for you to be able to vote for Trump again means that there is something inside of you that understands everything that's going on, and whether it is you co-signing it intentionally, saying, yeah, I agree with all of this, or just saying those things aren't a deal breaker for me because of my pocketbook or because of this one thing that he did that I liked. That is a moral quandary that is going to be difficult to overcome when it comes to those people. That being said, I do think that there are those who aren't actively engaged in politics. And I know that to be the case in the 1st district, because when I announced, many people said, well, I thought Mia was the candidate. Okay, well, Mia was the candidate last time. It's over now. More people are running again. So a lot of people don't necessarily understand how the process works to begin with. And so my hope would be that a lot of those people that were initially for Trump just because he's a say it like it is kind of person that, liked Bernie's progressive values, but more liked Bernie's no BS values, I hope that this campaign can resonate with those people. Maybe the ones that were just kind of removed from politics, because people like us, we're in it every single day, right? We are paying attention to it. We're studying it. We're constantly reading about it. We're constantly watching about it, and we're immersed in it. And the average American isn't. They just aren't. That's why, half the country doesn't vote. And that's why we allow people like Andy Harris to sit in Congress for over a decade, because people aren't really engaged with the process. So my hope is that there are those out there that this campaign would resonate with in some capacity, even if they were a part of that group, that maybe we can either change minds or win over.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to ask one more question before kicking it over to Jason. So we've talked a lot about the general, not so much about the primary. And I know that you're in this to win this. You want to win in 2022. But it does strike me that the district, if you look at the Biden numbers, maybe not so, the Biden numbers were pretty doggone good in the 1st congressional district. Kent County, Wicomico County, both went over. I think Talbot County by a very narrow margin. And there are signs to suggest that the Eastern Shore is starting to uptick towards the blue side. assuming things, and I also can't help but notice you're a good bit younger than the other people who are in the primary race. You know, in a year and a half from now, you might go, "Oh my God, Bill, that's what was the worst experience of my life." So feel free to change this answer. But assuming it doesn't work out this time, would you remain committed? Do you think you would possibly remain committed to run in future elections?
I think that I'd remain committed to doing whatever is necessary to make the first district a better place, whether that's running or whether that's engaging with groups that helps get out the vote. That remains to be seen, right? I'm going to do whatever I can to make my home a better place. And the reason that I ran this time was because, truth be told, I just didn't think that there was a candidate. And honestly, I still don't think that there is, beyond myself in this campaign, that can effectively make that change and win over that part of the district that is, you know, actively changing and actively growing. And I want to remain committed to that. I want to remain committed to the notion of making my home a better place. And yeah, again, maybe in a year and a half, I'll say, "You're right, Bill, that was terrible. I'll never do that again." But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think that whatever happens, I'm going to keep doing the work, whatever that work looks like.
Jason, over to you to bring it home, sir.
Thanks. Two questions. The first is, I want to explore the space just a little bit on your comments talking about some of those voters in that outsider space, the kind of folks that maybe went from Bernie to Trump in the general in 2016. The way I see it, a common connector between those folks, beyond you know, concerns of well, I think probably more culture on the Trump side in terms of fighting the old culture wars, but in terms of looking at as being alienated from society, I think another common connection is, quite frankly, and for the Bernie brothers, as much as I hate to admit this, there can be a blind spot on questions of race. And then you have the absolute virulent races going all the way to the virulent racism of Trump and his more hardened acolytes. How are you supposed to appeal to these folks that perhaps you know, don't think about larger societal questions in terms of race or class or gender, and related to that, do you feel as though your campaign might be under pressures? Right now, it's the Democratic field is mostly women. I think you're the only male candidate. So I guess what I'm saying is, will there be an understanding of intersectionality? Will there be a sense of standing up to any misogynistic comments that may pop up over the course of the campaign? So could you just briefly talk about your views on race and gender as they pertain to sort of the aspirations of the first district?
Absolutely. And I think that's a good question to be asked, because I think in being in this race, and I've seen it already, is that when you make a comment against another candidate, I'll be forthright in saying that I need to be sure that that comment can withstand its own scrutiny, right? Because I think in being in a race that is, excuse me, filled with incredibly qualified and talented women, opposing those women, if not done properly, can be easily viewed as misogynistic or sexist. And I think that has already happened within this campaign of simply calling out things that I disagree with and it immediately being viewed as sexist just because it was from a man to a woman. And I think that that's something that we need to be, as our campaign needs to be completely mindful of going forward, and respecting other views and trying to tackle those differences in opinion without ever making it about something that it isn't. And I think we also need to protect ourselves against any kind of false claims like that. I think it's easy to just call out certain things and say, this is sexist, or this is, in Mia's case, transphobic, when, you know, one of my biggest advocates is my friend who's been transitioning for the last 2 years. And I think those things need to be noted, that I want to surround myself with the communities and the people who I understand need a voice. I'm a white guy, right? And I think we can all agree that white guys have had their time for a while now. And in doing that, I understand that there are other demographics at play. There are other personalities at play that do deserve a voice. And I want to surround myself with those voices to make sure that they're heard and make sure that they're respected. And to win over someone that has those opinions, I hope that we would win them over based on policy, not in any way capitulating or humoring those notions within themselves. That's not something that I'm here for. It's not something that I intend on doing in any capacity. If you have those mindsets, I don't agree with them, and I do disrespect them. So I want to make that perfectly clear, is that we're not here to win over Bernie Bros. We're here to win over people who may have different views on the system in different ways. And agreed that some of those people will vote for me. They will. And there's no getting around that. But just because they are voting for me does not mean that I in any way condone those actions, right? And I'll make that perfectly clear throughout the next year and a half, is that has no place in this campaign.
And I do have one last question. This is a question that was alluded to a little bit earlier in the conversation. So say, I don't know, you're on the Eastern Shore. It's 2:45 in the morning. You're approached by a voter who really wants to hear all about you.
Let's say outside the Easton Diner, because I'm trying to think of something that's open on the Eastern Shore, 2:45 a.m.
And you're trying to get into your car, quiet evening, you don't see this voter, and wham, they come up to you and say, "What's your deal?" What do you tell that voter?
Which one? Which deal? Which one are we talking about? How much time do you have?
The general elevator pitch deal.
I think the general elevator pitch deal is this, is that I am a normal person. I'm not a politician. I have been disenfranchised by the system just as much as you have. I have not contributed to it in any capacity like some of our other candidates have. Additionally, I am a millennial, and I think that's a selling point, right? We got older people all over Congress consistently making decisions for the rest of the country, when those decisions will only, we'll just phrase it this way, those decisions will only impact them for a certain amount of time in the future. And it'll affect us for the next 40, 50, 60 years. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed, is the fact that people are making decisions for young people who will not have to live with those, or we will have to live with those decisions while they will not. And that's something that needs to be noted. And beyond all that, I am doing this because I care about people. I don't have any interest in truly being a politician. I don't want it to be my career. I don't want to be a politician for 20 years. I want to serve my time to my community. And in doing that, I want to be able to go back to that community and then enjoy the work that I put in, right? I don't want to be there forever. And I don't think anybody should be there forever, because
are you saying, sorry to interrupt, I just want to make sure this is clear on this point. Are you saying you're accepting a voluntary term limit? If so, how many terms, how many years?
I think that's up for debate right now. I do think that there should be term limits, but I don't think the term limits should necessarily be introduced until we address campaign finance law, right? Because if we don't do that, then it doesn't matter how long anybody's in Congress, whether they're in for 2 years or whether they're in for 20 years, they'll still be beholden to large amounts of money. So in order to do that, we need to get big money out of politics. And once it's out of politics, then we have the ability to say, okay, now you just have to run on your own volition. Now you actually have to run on your ideals. Now you have to run on the money of the people, and you have to answer to those people. When you have millions and millions of dollars in the bank, you don't have to answer to anybody, because you're still going to have all of the resources to win your next election. But when you are having to deliver on the promises that you've made, that's going to make or break your next election, especially in Congress when we're running every 2 years. So again, this is all in theory, right? This is all in a perfect world. I would think that because there needs to be some kind of leadership in place in Congress, we've seen it on the Republican side where they've instituted these, I forget how what they necessarily call their leadership process, but this is why you get Devin Nunes in charge of Intel and he has no idea what he's doing. We need people in Congress who have been serving long enough to be able to kind of lead the way and carve the path for people that are coming in, while still also not capitalizing on having been there for forever, right? I think there is a happy medium that we need to reach, to where we can continue the path that has been set, and continue the way that things have been running, to make sure that things run smoothly without taking advantage of the system and just making it a paycheck for 20 years of your life. So my thought process would be, if everything's in a perfect situation, perfect scenario, 6 to 8 years for a congressman, and then should leadership come along and say, hey, we want you to serve for the next 4 years, so you can kind of take newer congressmen under your wing and show them the ropes and everything, then that should be taken into consideration as well. It just depends on the person.
All right. Hell of a long elevator, but thank you, Matt.
All right. Matt, I lied. I said I didn't have any other questions, but it's kind of not a question. For people who want to be in touch with you, who want to know about your campaign, what do they do? Head over to electmatttalley.com. Talley. A lot of people forget the E. So electmatttalley.com, you can view all of our positions on different issues when it comes to our platform, as well as being able to donate. I don't want to speak too much to it yet, but we have some really neat merchandise that's going to be available in coming weeks. We've been working really hard with a lot of unions around the state to make sure that we are getting merchandise that is American made, union made, and some of it which is made in Maryland, which makes me very happy. So those are things that we're going to be rolling out in the next few weeks. Terrific, terrific. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I hope you too enjoy your wintry mix.
Oh, I will.
And, definitely do. I hope you'll consider coming on again.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a long way to September 2022. Lots of fish fries and a couple crab feasts, God willing, to go between now and then.
Yeah, love it. All right. Well, thank you for having me, guys. And yeah, let's do this again soon.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. Jason, anything in closing?
No, just stay safe out there.
I will try.
As all of us should. So for Jason Booms, my name is Bill Woodcock. You've been watching and/or listening to Forward Maryland. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.